Hey there, WellHouse Church. How we doing this morning? I hope that you're doing well, enjoying some time of fellowship and breaking of bread. I hope that you're enjoying good food together and that you're ready to join me for a time of teaching. So why don't you go ahead and grab a cup of coffee, grab some more food, and join us this morning for our teaching. I don't know about you, but this week has been quite emotional for me. A lot of anxiety and stress around the election and who the next president was going to be. Waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting some more for an announcement, a projection. The constant back and forth from two sides. And I consider myself to be a political kind of nerd junkie. It is something that I monitor quite closely in the world. And, something just struck me this week. Of all the elections that we've had and of all the kinds of different things that America has went through, we knew that the COVID election was going to be weird. But we didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. But I think it was more telling than we want to give it credit for. We have the Electoral College. And so because we have the Electoral College, very few people actually look at the popular vote. But I think the popular vote's pretty telling. We had over 150 million Americans vote in this election, and the number is still rising. Both candidates had the most votes they've ever had. Donald Trump won by more than Donald Trump received more than 5 million votes this election than he did last election, and they're still counting. Joe Biden, at the last point I looked, was at like 75 million, the most votes that any president in the history of America has ever received. This election had the most votes that we've ever had in an American presidential election. And yet, the only thing that those numbers tell me is that our country is more divided and broken than it has ever been. I look at this, and at the current rate, I'm recording this Saturday night, at the current rate, currently Joe Biden has over 4.5 million vote lead in the popular vote, and they haven't finished counting. And yet, still more than 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. We could not be more broken. There are no winners in this election. There are none. There are people who voted for Joe Biden, and in the fact that he will be our next president, they have quote unquote won, but America has lost because we are a country without an identity. We are a country without unity. We are a country without faith. Several months back, as I was outlining my preaching calendar, I decided that I was going to preach this series called Because of Faith, because I saw some things in the text that led me to believe that we needed to reevaluate the way we looked at faith and this concept, this idea of what faith is. And then, as just the way God works, this week I sat down several times to record this sermon, and I just couldn't do it because it's not the message that I felt you needed this morning. If you're anything like me, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of uncertainty for a whole lot of people. There are a whole lot of people that feel much less stress and anxiety knowing that Joe Biden is going to be the next president. If you're an immigrant, if you're a Muslim, you feel a whole lot less stress and anxiety knowing that Biden is going to be the president. But if you're a conservative, you feel a whole lot of anxiety around Joe Biden being the president. Because we are a broken country. We're not unified. We are a country without faith. And here's what I want you to know about faith. Faith makes a difference. Faith is not some abstract concept that's removed from any tangible evidence. We see faith all throughout the New Testament, and every time we see it, something happens because of faith. Faith makes a difference. And I want you to see this in Matthew 9 this morning. This is an interesting story. It's coupled with another story. But it's coupled with this. It's these two stories of healing. One is the story of the centurion, the Roman official's daughter, and the other one is the story that we're going to look at this morning. This is beginning in verse 20. But as they were heading to the man's house, a woman who had been hemorrhaging and bleeding for 12 years crept up behind Jesus. Something that you need to know is I'm going to read this story both metaphorically and literally this morning. This is a real woman who has a real brokenness. She's been hemorrhaging blood for 12 years. But so is America. America is a country who's been hemorrhaging blood for 12 years. We have constantly, since the beginning of 2008, found ourselves more and more broken from the Obama administration, from term 1 to term 2, and now to Trump. We, for the past 12 years, have been hemorrhaging blood, finding ourselves more and more and more broken as a country, and therefore more and more broken as individuals. Each and every time we've experienced brokenness over and over and over again for the last 12 years. This is that woman's story. She has an ailment of brokenness that forces her to bleed, just like we are. She is constantly in a state of loss, just like we are. And yet, in her state of loss, look at what she does. And so she came up behind him and touched his cloak. Jesus turned around and saw her. "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has healed you." And indeed, from that moment, the woman was healed. So Jesus is on a journey with this other man in order to provide healing and restoration to this other man. And this woman who's been broken, she's hemorrhaging blood, she tracks down Jesus and she creeps up behind him. This is very beautiful language here about the way and the posture in which she's moving behind him. She's an outcast of society. She's so broken, it's almost like there's no hope. But she herself has hope for healing and restoration. Just like many of you this morning may be feeling like there's no hope for our country. There's no hope for healing and restoration. This woman is in that same boat, but she takes action. She goes, she moves, she pursues a goal to just touch Jesus' cloak. And as Jesus is journeying with these other men, not even actively aware of what's happening, she makes it. She works hard. At the last bit of energy she has left, as she hemorrhages and constantly loses blood, she reaches out and grabs his cloak. In the other renditions of this story, it says Jesus felt the power leave him, as if he was not cognizantly aware that he was healing this woman. Yet her actions from her faith healed her. In this story, Jesus turns around and he sees her and he says, "Take heart, your faith has healed you." See, faith is something that's deep within us that causes us to action. And this woman doesn't have much left to give and act on except her faith. And it's her faith that's the fuel for her action, for her activity that leads to her healing. And so today, I want to ask you two questions. I want to ask you a very, very individual question about your own need for healing. I know I haven't really done this sermon justice in that regard. Tune in tomorrow for a closer look. I do a much better job of talking about the ins and outs of this from an individual perspective. But really what I want to ask you is, do you have faith for what God can do in America? Do you have faith that you're on your last bit of energy, that you're running on faith alone, and that faith can cause you and fuel you to action? Do you have enough faith in Jesus that he can stop the bleeding? Do you have enough faith for the restoration of the whole? This woman finds herself in this place where she is completely broken on her last leg, just like we find ourselves. But her faith is enough for the whole of her being to be restored. Do you have that level of faith? Can you find enough faith in you to pursue healing, to pursue activities and actions of healing for those around you? Our country is broken. The people around us are hurting, and our neighbor is in need of healing. And only Jesus can stop the bleeding. So my question, what will you do because of